I am Pierre LUMUMBA here at the Aberdares Country Club in Nyeri County in the Republic of Kenya in our mother continent of Africa. And we continue to discuss issues about the continent. And today we focus on a country that remains troubled. The country now known as the Central African Republic. Prior to that, its name was Ubangishari. Ubangishari was the name of Central African Republic, and that name changed only when she regained independence toward the end of the 1950s, in the early 60s. And at that time, the person who became the leader was David Dacko. When David Dacko became the leader, he was, of course, one of the leading African leaders. And it is significant that when I read the compilation of the 32 speeches that were delivered in Addis Ababa between the 23rd and 25th days of May 1963, one of the most iconic speeches was by David Dacko. And he said, if I paraphrase, that Central African Republic is happy to be a part of the Organization of African Unity, because if we were not, we would not be free from the clutches of the French. So David Dacko became the president of Central African Republic, headquartered in Bangui. But what then happened became very unfortunate, because in 1966 there was a coup d'etat. And in that coup d'etat there emerged a man called Jean Bedel Bokassa. Jean Bedel Bokassa served in the French army and was a great admirer of Charles de Gaulle. And one of the things that he did was to make himself Emperor Jean Bedel Bokassa. He forced school children to buy clothes, and he enthroned himself as the emperor in the style of Napoleon Bonaparte. And this individual ruined the economy of Central African Republic. He ruined the economy of that country in such a monumental way by dividing people along tribal and religious lines. The northern part of Central African Republic is largely Islamic. The southern part is largely Christian. And what he did was to use the money that he had to build major palaces. He remained in that condition and troubled the people. And of course, at one time, he was supported, of course, by the French. And also, he moved from the French support and went to Muammar al-Gaddafi. And that is when the trouble started, and that is when the problems of Central African Republic started. Because the French were saying, how are we losing our country, their country, to Muammar al-Gaddafi? And in 1979, they determined that they bring back David Dacko to power in what was then known as Operation Barracuda. And during the Operation Barracuda, it is instructive. When this man, Jean Bedel Bokassa, was in power, it was very interesting. He had a very close relationship with the then French leader, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. And Valéry was so close to him that he was alleged to have been bribed by Jean Bedel Bokassa. And that is how he lost the election to François Mitterrand. And it is during the administration of François Mitterrand that the Operation Barracuda was undertaken, and it brought our good friend David Dacko back to power in 1979. But he did not last long, because in the year 1981, André Kolimba mounted a coup d'etat. And from that day on, coup d'etats became the problem of Central African Republic. Patasse became, and there were many coups d'etats until the most iconic coup d'etat took place when Francois Bozize became the president. And there had been a number of heads of state, but Francois Bozize is important in this regard because we now started having breakdown of law and order along tribal and religious lines, and coups d'etats were mounting, and the French were bringing in their legionnaires in order to ensure that that particular place was stabilized. And when Bozize was ultimately overthrown in the year 2013, that is when a very good friend of mine, Catherine Samba Panza, became a transitional president for 2 years. Samba Panza became a good candidate to be a transitional president. Some thought you needed a motherly touch. She had also been the mayor of the city of Bangui, and she served reasonably well by way of transitioning the country into an electoral period. But that electoral period, which saw the emergence of President Teodora, who still remains the president. And Teodora remained the president, but it must be remembered in 2013, when there was the coup that took away Bozize, there had been Suleiman Abdullahi Selem, who is from the Seleka group, who are now to be found in the north. They were mounting this particular coup, saying that the North cannot be ignored. The conflict was now a Christian, Muslim, and a tribal conflict, and the government of Central African Republic no longer had control of that environment. The French had somehow abandoned them. And when Teodora came, that is when the movement away from the French started in earnest. It is the administration of Teodora that then invited the Wagner Group from Russia. And the Wagner Group stabilized Bangui, stabilized the areas that are controlled by his administration. And as it is now, what the Wagner Group was doing was also to protect the miners, because this is a country that is very rich in minerals. It's bigger than almost twice the size of France. That is how big the Central African Republic is. They started protecting the mine, and as we speak now, I dare say, if the Russian group is eliminated from Central African Republic in Bangui, which I've had the occasion of visiting only 2 years ago, if they leave, then there would be chaos in Central African Republic. It is that chaos that has also attracted the attention of the UN and attracted the attention of the African Union. Of course, there was the dalliance of United Nations force there for purpose of peacekeeping. There was also the idea of having the African Union. But we also know that the conflicts in the neighborhood have also affected the Central African Republic. We have had people from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have even had elements of the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda finding their way to Central African Republic. We have had elements from Sudan finding their way into that area. We have had elements of the Janjaweed from Chad and from Sudan finding their way in the Central African Republic. So we have a country that is in a state of confusion, a state of conflict, and conflict that is nuanced in many ways. Not so long ago, I was listening to a documentary about the Central African Republic, and it was a documentary where they were interviewing the leader of the rebel group somewhere in the northern part of Central African Republic. And I heard him address his troops. He says, we are going back to Bangui. And when we go back to Bangui, we are going to ensure that you are integrated into the army. But remember that the Seleka group, which is a rebel group, is also split into many factions. And this split is also exacerbated by the existence of Islamist group in that particular region, with the consequence that there is not a single command, and with the consequence that the world is no longer interested in Central African Republic, with the consequence that there are people who are also fueling hostility and conflict into that arena, because it enables them to mine gold, it enables them to mine different minerals, and it also enables them to exploit the other resources to be found in that particular region. So what do we have in Central African Republic? We have an administration that in many ways is collapsing. We have an administration that is collapsing because we have elements, and some even argue that that collapse is engineered by elements from France. It is even argued that that collapse is engineered by people who are interested in illicit mines. It is argued that that particular collapse is also engineered by Islamist groups which are interested in creating chaos for the purpose of enabling the miners who are coming from different parts of the world to take away the wealth of Central African Republic. The tragedy is, because there is no central government that is capable of controlling this particular country, it is known that the country does not have the ability to collect taxes. It is known that the infrastructure in that country is non-existent. In fact, if you travel outside of Bangui, some of the last tarmacs that were there were during the colonial period. It is known that there is no railway. It is known that there are very few airlines that actually fly into that area. I can dare say, because I know this as a fact, it is only Ethiopian Airline that now flies there regularly. Kenya Airways, which had its flights to that place, has discontinued them or flies intermittently. So that country is one that is in crisis, and one would have loved to see the United Nations involved a lot more intimately. And one would have loved to see the African Union involved a lot more intimately, and the Organization of Central African Republic involved a lot more intimately, because it cannot be that a government which claims to be a government of an independent country relies on an external force to underwrite its existence and to guarantee its existence, as the administration of Faustin Theodora is currently undergirded by a Russian force. And the reality, therefore, is that we have a failed state in our hands in the form of Central African Republic. Beyond the lamentation, what ought to be done? What ought to be done is that one wants to see an African Union, particularly now that we talk about the pacification of the continent of Africa, the Central African Republic, or Ubangishari as we knew it before the advent of the colonizers, is at the very heart of Africa. And if it remains in that state, then it is an unfortunate situation, because it is aiding the conflicts that are taking place in the Sahelian region and creating an environment that will interfere with many things in the continent of Africa, including trade, including the free movement of peoples, including the elimination of non-tariff barriers, which require that we have infrastructure that will be the lifeblood of trade in the continent of Africa. A sorry state. It started badly. The French intervened badly. They undermined the stability of the country badly. And lastly, I saw the son of Jean Bedel Bokassa going back to Bangui and saying, I want to reclaim our palace. I hope that it will not happen. That is Central African Republic, an unfortunate country which we have a duty to protect and to resuscitate. Thank you very much. We continue to look at the continent of Africa, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but our continent nevertheless.
The world is changing, and so is Africa's reality. Political shifts, new partnerships, and economic opportunities. And we're here to uncover why and how it's done. What do the billion-dollar IMF loans have to do with the Kenyan unrest? Are US and French troops actually withdrawing from African states after years of presence? Is Europe's so-called green agenda so green and helpful after all? Why are more and more African countries increasing trade with Russia? And how is Britain lending Africa the treasures London looted? Now, from colonial legacies and security to the future of African democracies, we break down the key challenges ahead and analyze the solutions. While the world is watching Africa, tune in with us and question more with RT International on Maisha TV Kenya.
problem number one is leadership in Africa.
What can we do for Africa? That was a wrong question. The right question was, what can we do with Africa?
What Africa do we want?
Africa had to seek first the political kingdom, and the rest would be given unto them. Unfortunately, we sought and obtained the political kingdom, but there is still a debate as to whether the rest has been given unto us.
Half of our people here are below 20 years old. Yes? Look at the average age of our presidents. Is about 63, 64 years old. We're the only continent in the world where we have presidents at 90 years old starting new terms. I mean, you guys are crazy or what?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mushabi Jr. on your screen, bringing to you a program called Maisha Talk. This is where we build your capacity to achieve your dreams and visions. One thing I've learned in life is nobody can ever tell you that you can never be anything or achieve anything in this world. Shut them down. You can achieve anything in this world. And in this program, that is what we are talking about. Principles, attitudes, belief systems, where you are going to gain a lot. You're better off than anybody who's not going to watch this program. This is going to change your life. It's big, it's fun, it's educating, it's entertaining. Right here on Maisha Television, where you choose it, you watch it, and you definitely love it.
This keeps me going on those days when I feel like giving up. Fire.
Do not want the money or properties achieved in a corrupt way.
Badala ya kusaidia watoto wadogo wadogo katika academy za sport, wewe kazi yako imekuwa kila weekend unakuja kwa matanga kutukana viongozi. Wewe ni waziri wa michezo ama waziri wa matanga na masuala za ndani.
Sasa wewe unatuambia nini? This government is going to punish you more than they will punish me.
Tuko na mheshimiwa Eugene, tuko na mheshimiwa Lusaka, na mheshimiwa Wetangula.
I have no problem. I have full confidence in the agencies that we have to do their job. Who are out there bandying my brother yesterday. Me, I've said, if he's guilty, aendelee.
Lakini hata nyinyi mkuwe na mshike rada. Sasa nyinyi wakati ya kufanya kazi mnasema tafuta Ruto, lakini siku ya kupiga kura mnaniambia tipping. Sasa nyinyi kweli mko na plani?
We invite you to like Maisha TV Kenya on all our online media platforms. Facebook at Maisha TV Kenya, Twitter at Maisha TV Kenya, Instagram at Maisha TV Kenya. Maisha TV now invites you to send your feedback or complain because we listen to you. You can now reach us on all our media platforms on Maisha TV. Just send your messages to our social media platforms, call or text us on 0746 999 841 or send us an email to info@maishatv.co.ke. We care. We shall respond to your feedback or complaints within 14 days. Also, keep a copy of messages sent to us. We listen to you because you listen and you watch us. Maisha TV. Choose it, watch it, and love it.
I am Pierre Lumumba here at the Aberdares Country Club and Sanctuary in Nyeri County in the Republic of Kenya in the continent of Africa. As we continue our conversations about the continent, one of the ever-nagging issues is how Africa can liberate herself completely from the colonizer turned neo-colonizer. And when we discuss this subject, it must be remembered that that liberation must not only be limited to the African continent, but must be extended to Africa in the diaspora. You know, the colonizer sat down. They sat down and conceived an idea. And the idea was to conquer other peoples, and Africa became a target. And in order to do this, the first thing that they did was to attack the African mind. Attack the African mind and attack African spirituality. And that entailed the demonization of everything that was African. If you had an African god, that god had to be demonized. If you had African education, the education had to be demonized. If you had African culture in her diversity, the culture had to be demonized. If you had African ways of doing things in all their permutations, they had to be demonized. Of course, the colonial project appeared to succeed, and that is why African countries were under colonial tutelage for a long time, with major European countries having their spheres of influence and fiefdoms. But the vestiges of liberation and independence were always alive. And this is how you understand the different resistance that were to be found within the continent and outside of the continent. When you talk about the rebellions among the Maji, and when you talk about the Mau Mau, when you talk about Shaka the Zulu, all these were attempts at warding off the colonizer. When the Africans ultimately started regaining political independence, we thought that we had liberated ourselves, but the tragedy was that we received the crown without the crown jewels. And the neo-colonial project remains alive today. Hence, the legitimacy of asking ourselves, how do we liberate ourselves from this particular pain? How do we ensure that the African continent is understood in a manner that speaks to the African peoples? Let me start with religion. Religion is one of the most contentious things to talk about. Today, the dominant religions in the continent of Africa are Christianity, and some of us profess to be Christians. Some of us profess to be Muslims. But let us look at the religion that was brought to the African continent and how it was midwifed. If you are colonized by the Germans, you are likely to have received the Lutheran version of Christianity, in other words, the Germanized kind. If you are colonized by the Dutch, you received the Dutch Reformed Church. If you are colonized by the English, You received the Anglican Church, in other words, the Anglicized version of it. And of course, you also had an addition of the Scottish with the Presbyterian and the Methodist. So all these were midwifed. Even Jesus Christ was whitened and given blue eyes. The first thing that we must do, therefore, is to regain our spirituality and recognize that God is one and is worshipped in different ways. Once we regain our spirituality as a people, then our confidence will remain. The second thing that they did was to interfere with our governance systems. You know, when I look at the governance systems in Africa, when I read the great Anta Diop of Senegal, when he talks about Africa before the advent of colonization, when I look at the kingdom of Sondiata Keita and the home of Mansa Musa, when I look at the old kingdoms in Liberia and in Nigeria and in Ghana and in Kenya and in Buganda and Binyoro Kitara and amongst the Zulu and in the Monomotapa Empire amongst the Ndongo in Angola, I know, and amongst the Oromo, the Gada system, and in Ethiopia, I know that Africans had governance systems which sustained Africa in their diversity. All those were destroyed. They took African leaders, took some of them to the Seychelles Island, St. Helena, exiled them there in places like Haiti. Napoleon captured Toussaint de Louverture and took him to Paris, and he died there. We must reclaim our governance systems and write about them as a weapon in our arsenal in order to liberate ourselves from this thing called democracy. Because this thing called democracy, you came up with it. Is it not true that when the American Declaration of Independence came alive, it said that they held certain truths to be self-evident, that all men were born equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights? When they said that, did the Negro still not remain in captivity? It tells you that when they talked about democracy and the one man, one vote, it was something that defined their own circumstances. Africa must rethink governance systems. And once we have rethought governance systems, then Africa will begin to liberate herself. And in this manner, it is the only way in which we can defeat an enemy who comes in different ways. You know, when we talk about us being in a position to defeat the colonizers, we must also remind ourselves that one of the things that the colonizer uses is to divide and rule. In fact, the British method was divide and rule. They came to Kenya and they told different ethnicities, you are different from the other ethnicity. They went to Nigeria, told the Yoruba, told the Hausa, told the Igbo, told the Kalabari. They went to Ghana, told the Ga, told the Akan. They came to Kenya, told the Agikoyo, told the Luo, told the Abaluhya and the Kalenjin that you are different. And as long as we remain divided, they will always conquer us. And they did not stop there. When they knew that we were regaining independence, they sowed the seeds of disunity amongst us, so that when we speak in tongues. They created a Tower of Babel. That Tower of Babel is what enables them to dominate us. So we must unite. And when I talk about unity, I'm not talking about the unity of the graveyard where there is no noise. I'm talking about unity that allows us to put ideas on the table. And when those ideas have been placed on the table, we may have different perspectives. We may even disagree. But when we disagree in an agreeable manner. And we emphasize the things that unite us and de-emphasize the things that make us disunited. And we must also be strong. You know, this idea of romanticizing our black beauty is without basis and without any fruits. We can be beautiful all we want, but if we are weak, then we are going nowhere. We must be strong. And in gaining our strength, and if we use clubs, we can use clubs all we want, but we want the new clubs. You know, it is in Kiswahili where they say, amani haiji ila kwa ncha ya upanga. Peace does not come other than on the tip of the sword. In other words, when you want peace, you must also be prepared for war. And Africans must now begin to remember that our little armies in Lesotho, in Eswatini, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Mozambique, in Libya, in Eritrea, in Ghana, are useless because an American warship stationed in the Atlantic and one in the Indian Ocean and one south of Africa will decimate all of us. But if we united as one, then we will send a clear message that we are prepared to die one and all for the sake of the mother continent. History is consistent. History is clear that it is only those who are prepared, those who are united, those who speak with one voice, those who are organized are the very same who will liberate themselves. Africa must remember that we are not the only peoples, the only continents who have been enslaved. We are not the only continent and peoples who have been humiliated. Others have been humiliated before, but they have stood up and they have succeeded in ensuring that they liberate themselves. You may say all you want about the Vietnamese. It was the most bombed nation on earth. But they always told the Americans we will never lose. And they never lost. There is something to be taken out of them. We must also ask, how is it that other civilizations have succeeded to withstand Western aggression? We need to have a conversation with the Russians. We need to have a conversation with the Chinese. We need to have a conversation with the Thais. The net effect is that Africa must unite. And as I sit here, I can still hear through the vicissitudes of time the voices of great Africans telling us, unite. I can hear Ahmed Ben Bella shouting from Algeria. I can hear Julius Nyerere shouting from Dar es Salaam. I can hear Robert Mangaliso Subuku and Winnie Mandela and Tiro Ngopose shouting from South Africa, let us unite. I can hear Kenneth Kaunda shouting, let us unite. I can hear the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah. I can hear Amilcar Cabral. I can hear Ahmed Sékou Touré. All of them saying unity. I can hear them saying that you cannot, in the nature of things, do things when you do not unite amongst yourselves. I can hear them saying, let us all have all our beautiful languages, but let us also speak in Kiswahili. I can hear them saying, speak in one commercial language and a currency that is African. I can hear them saying, we can defeat these neo-colonizers. We can defeat them. And when we defeat them, they'll begin to sit with us on the table. They'll begin to respect us. And we'll begin to say with what my good friend Robert Mangaliso is saying, that there is only one race in the world, the human race. That we can do, that we must do, and we know what ought to be done. But there is also another reality. When you are fighting a war and you are a general, all your secrets must not be known to your enemy. So we can only say so much. Some of our activities must remain subterranean, and subterranean is the way to go. But these are the broad things that it is incumbent upon us to do, because the unity of Africa is necessary, and Africans in the mother continent and in the diaspora, this is the time, wherever you are, in the Caribbean, in America, in Latin America, in Europe, in the mother continent, we must unite, because we must defeat the neo-colonizer. And remember, neo-colonization is the last stage of imperialism, and it's most dangerous because the neo-colonizer is at his most desperate. And we can see it. The desperation is alive and well. They are recruiting us with fifth columnists amongst our ranks, and we must and we will defeat them, if not by this generation, generations yet to come, because the war is intergenerational. Thank you very much. We continue our conversation and we talk about the colonizer. How do we defeat or liberate ourselves from them? But after liberation, after defeat, the day after, what do we do? This is the conversation that we will continue with when we come back. Thank you.